The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense pine canopy, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor as Sarah Blackwood adjusted her pack straps and checked the trail map one more time. At 42, Sarah had spent most of her adult life exploring the remote wilderness areas of Montana's Glacier National Park, earning her a reputation among fellow naturalists as one of the most knowledgeable independent wildlife photographers in the region. "Mom, how much further to the cabin?" Emily asked, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. At 16, she had inherited her mother's sharp green eyes and love for the outdoors, though she possessed considerably less patience for long hikes. "Just another mile or so," Sarah replied, tucking the map into her jacket pocket. "The ranger station said Whitefish Lake should be visible once we crest that ridge." She pointed to a tree-covered rise ahead of them. "The rental cabin is right on the northern shore." Emily nodded, adjusting her own smaller backpack and the case containing her video camera, a birthday present she'd received just 2 months earlier. Unlike her mother, who preferred still photography, Emily had developed a passion for wildlife documentary filmmaking, inspired by countless hours watching nature shows with her father before the divorce 4 years ago. This 5-day expedition into the more remote sections of the park was Sarah's way of reconnecting with her daughter after a particularly difficult school year. She had secured permits through her connections with the Park Service, allowing them access to areas normally restricted to casual hikers. "Think we'll see any bears?" Emily asked, her voice carrying equal measures of excitement and apprehension. "Possibly," Sarah answered carefully. "This is prime grizzly territory, especially this time of year with the berry season. That's why we've got the bear spray and why we store our food properly." She patted the canister attached to her belt. "But remember, bears generally avoid humans. If we make enough noise on the trail, we shouldn't surprise any." They continued along the narrow path as it wound between towering pines and dense thickets of wild huckleberry bushes. Sarah periodically called out, "Hey, bear," as they rounded blind corners, a standard practice in grizzly country to avoid startling the massive predators. The terrain grew steeper as they approached the ridge. Both women fell silent, conserving energy for the climb. The only sounds were their boots on the pine needle-covered trail and the occasional call of a Steller's jay from the canopy above. As they neared the crest of the ridge, Sarah suddenly raised her hand, signaling Emily to stop. "Listen," she whispered. Emily froze, straining to hear. At first, there was nothing beyond the usual forest sounds: wind through pine needles, distant bird calls, the soft rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Then she heard it. A deep, resonant huffing sound followed by the crack of breaking branches, coming from somewhere beyond the ridge. "Bear?" Emily whispered, her hand instinctively moving toward the bear spray on her belt. Sarah nodded slowly. "Sounds like it? Pretty big, from the noise it's making." She unslung her camera from her shoulder, a professional-grade Canon with a telephoto lens. "Let's proceed carefully. Stay close to me." They moved forward with greater caution, making more noise now to ensure the bear knew they were there. As they reached the top of the ridge, the forest opened slightly, offering a sweeping view of Whitefish Lake below, its surface glimmering gold and crimson in the late afternoon light. But it wasn't the breathtaking scenery that caused both women to stop in their tracks. About 80 yards down the slope, in a small clearing near a fallen Douglas fir, stood an enormous grizzly bear. The animal was massive, even by grizzly standards. Sarah estimated it stood nearly 8 feet tall when reared up, with a distinctive silver-tipped coat that shimmered in the sunlight filtering through the trees. "My God!" Sarah whispered, slowly raising her camera. "That's the biggest grizz I've ever seen." She began snapping photos, the camera's shutter barely audible. Emily, after a moment of awestruck silence, carefully removed her video camera from its case and began recording. Through the viewfinder, she watched the magnificent predator as it systematically tore apart the rotting log, powerful claws ripping through the decayed wood in search of grubs and insects. "Stay behind me," Sarah murmured, keeping her voice low and calm despite her racing heart. "If it notices us, we back away slowly. No sudden movements." For several minutes, they observed the bear from their position on the ridge, the animals seemingly unaware of their presence. Sarah captured frame after frame while Emily recorded steady footage. Both of them experienced enough in wildlife observation to remain perfectly still despite their excitement. Then, something changed. The bear's behavior shifted suddenly. Its massive head lifted, nostrils flaring as it sampled the air. Sarah tensed, wondering if their scent had finally reached the animal. But the bear wasn't looking in their direction. Instead, its attention was fixed on something in the forest on the opposite side of the clearing. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as an unnatural silence fell over the woods. The ambient forest sounds, birds, insects, the rustle of small mammals, ceased entirely. Even the breeze seemed to die away, leaving an eerie stillness that raised the hair on the back of Sarah's neck. "Mom," Emily whispered, the camera still rolling in her hands. "Something's wrong." Sarah nodded, that familiar sixth sense honed by years in the wilderness screaming warnings in her mind. Whatever had captured the grizzly's attention was something significant. Another bear, perhaps? A mountain lion? Neither seemed likely to cause this reaction in a dominant grizzly of this size. The bear rose onto its hind legs, towering to its full impressive height, nose working the air as it stared intently at the tree line. A deep growl rumbled from its throat. Not the bluff charge vocalization Sarah had heard before, but something different. Something that sounded almost like uncertainty. Then they heard it. A sound unlike anything Sarah had encountered in 2 decades of wilderness experience. Not quite a roar, not quite a howl, but something that existed uncomfortably between the two. The vocalization echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once, raising goosebumps along Sarah's arms despite the warm afternoon. "What was that?" Emily's voice wavered slightly, her camera now pointed toward the section of forest from which the sound had emanated. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her mind racing through possibilities. "Wolves? No, not that deep or resonant. Moose? Wrong timbre entirely. Mountain lion? Perhaps. But she'd never heard one make a sound remotely like this." The grizzly dropped back to all fours, swaying slightly as if weighing its options. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, it began to back away from the fallen log, moving with surprising speed for an animal of its size, never turning its back to the tree line. "The bear's retreating," Sarah whispered in disbelief. "I've never seen a dominant grizz back down like that." Before Emily could respond, the strange sound came again, louder this time and unmistakably closer. The underbrush at the edge of the clearing began to move, branches parting as something large pushed through from the forest beyond. Sarah's finger froze on her camera's shutter button as a figure emerged from the shadows. For a moment, her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing, trying desperately to categorize the being within her understanding of North American wildlife. It stood at least 8 feet tall, bipedal, with broad shoulders tapering to a narrower waist. Its body was covered in thick, dark brown fur, with longer hair hanging around what seemed to be a face, though Sarah could make out few details at this distance. Powerful arms hung at its sides, ending in what appeared to be hands rather than paws. The creature moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for its size, stepping into the clearing with deliberate purpose. "Mom," Emily's voice was barely audible. Is that what I think it is?" Sarah couldn't answer, her scientific mind battling with the evidence before her eyes. The being in the clearing matched no known species catalog, yet there it stood, impossible, undeniable. The grizzly, now clearly agitated, swung its massive head between the bipedal creature and the fallen log that represented its claim to the territory. It huffed loudly, paws digging into the earth as if preparing for a confrontation. The creature, Sarah still couldn't bring herself to name it even in her thoughts, stopped about 30 feet from the bear. For a long moment, the two massive beings regarded each other, predator facing predator in a tableau as ancient as the mountains themselves. "Keep recording," Sarah finally whispered to Emily, finding her voice. "Whatever happens, don't stop recording." Confrontation that followed would challenge everything Sarah thought she knew about the natural world. The grizzly moved first, swinging from uncertainty to aggression in an instant. It charged forward with surprising speed, covering the ground between itself and the bipedal creature in powerful bounds, jaws open in a roar that reverberated through the clearing. Any normal animal, any known animal, would have fled from the charging apex predator. 1,000 pounds of muscle, claw, and fury was not something even the most formidable wildlife would choose to confront. But the creature didn't flee. Instead, it dropped into a lower stance, almost like a wrestler preparing to grapple, and emitted that same haunting vocalization, louder now, directly challenging the oncoming bear. As the grizzly closed the final distance, massive paws extended. For a killing strike, the creature moved with shocking speed. Sarah gasped as the bipedal being sidestepped the bear's initial lunge with surprising agility, then pivoted to face the predator's flank. Before the grizzly could turn, the creature drove a powerful blow into the bear's side, the impact audible even from Sarah and Emily's position on the ridge. The bear roared in pain and surprise, twisting with incredible speed to swipe at its attacker. Claws that could disembowel a moose with a single strike slashed through the air. But the creature was already moving again, dancing backward just beyond the grizzly's reach. "This isn't possible," Sarah whispered, her camera continuing to capture the impossible scene frame by frame. Nothing moves that fast against a grizzly. Nothing. The bear charged again, this time more cautiously. The two massive beings circled each other, the grizzly huffing and popping its jaws, classic intimidation behavior, while the creature maintained an unnervingly silent focus, only occasionally emitting low grunts that seemed to vibrate the very air. For nearly a minute they continued this deadly dance, neither willing to fully commit to an attack. Then the grizzly feinted left before lunging right, a complex move that spoke to the species' frightening intelligence. Its massive paw connected with the creature's shoulder, staggering it momentarily. Sarah expected the bipedal being to retreat after taking a hit from the 1,000-pound predator. Instead, it recovered its balance with unnatural quickness and closed the distance before the bear could press its advantage. What happened next occurred so rapidly that Sarah's camera barely captured the sequence. The creature grappled the grizzly, massive arms wrapping around the bear's upper body in what looked almost like a wrestler's clinch. For a moment, they stood locked together, two apex predators straining against each other's strength. Then, with a twist that seemed to defy physics, the bipedal creature shifted its weight and actually lifted the grizzly partially off its front paws, driving it sideways and down with tremendous force. The impact when they hit the ground sent a small cloud of dust and pine needles into the air. The bear roared in rage and pain, thrashing violently to free itself. It managed to sink its teeth into the creature's forearm, a bite that would have crushed the bones of any known animal. The creature responded with a roar of its own, a sound so primal, so deep and resonant that Sarah felt it in her chest like a physical force. It delivered 3 rapid blows to the bear's head with its free arm, powerful strikes that finally caused the grizzly to release its bite. In the momentary reprieve, the creature disengaged and leapt backward, putting space between itself and the now bleeding bear. The grizzly rose to its feet, shaking its massive head as if to clear it. Blood matted the fur around its right ear, and it favored its left front paw slightly as it reoriented toward its opponent. From her vantage point, Sarah could see that the creature was also wounded, dark fluid, presumably blood, matting the fur of its right arm where the bear's teeth had found purchase, yet it showed no signs of retreating. "They're going to fight to the death," Emily whispered, her voice a mixture of horror and awe, camera still recording steadily despite her shaking hands. Before Sarah could respond, the grizzly charged again, covering the ground between them with frightening speed. This time, however, its attack was more measured, more tactical. Instead of lunging high, it went low, aiming to get under the bipedal creature's center of gravity. The creature attempted to sidestep as before, but the bear anticipated the move and adjusted its trajectory. 800 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into the bipedal being's legs, sending both creatures tumbling to the forest floor in a chaotic tangle of fur, limbs, and disturbed earth. For several seconds, it was impossible to distinguish one from the other as they rolled across the clearing, the bear's roars mingling with the creature's deeper vocalizations in a nightmarish duet. Soil and vegetation flew into the air as claws and powerful limbs tore at the ground for purchase. Then they separated, the creature somehow extracting itself from the deadly embrace and regaining its feet with that same uncanny agility. The grizzly rose more slowly, its breathing heavy, blood now visible on its shoulder and flank. The creature didn't press its advantage immediately. Instead, it backed up several paces, never taking its eyes off the wounded bear. In this moment of relative stillness, Sarah got her first clear look at its face, or what was visible beneath. The curtain of shaggy hair, deep-set eyes reflected the late afternoon sunlight with an amber glow. The face was flatter than a bear's, with a pronounced brow ridge and what appeared to be a more human-like nose than any ape she had studied. The mouth, visible when it opened to emit another challenging vocalization, contained teeth that seemed designed for an omnivorous diet rather than pure predation. "It's real," Sarah breathed, unable to deny the evidence before her eyes any longer. "It's actually real." The bear, despite its injuries, wasn't ready to concede the territory. It charged, again, this time with the desperate fury of a predator fighting for its life, rather than merely asserting dominance. The creature met the charge head-on, no longer attempting to evade, but instead meeting strength with strength. The impact when they collided was like two freight trains meeting at full speed. Both titans staggered from the force, but it was the bear that recovered first, sweeping a massive paw in an uppercut that connected solidly with the creature's chest. The blow should have ended the fight. Sarah had seen grizzlies kill elk with less powerful strikes. But somehow, the bipedal being remained standing, though it stumbled backward several paces from the impact. The bear pressed what it must have perceived as an advantage, charging forward, once more. This time, however, the creature was ready. As the grizzly reared up to deliver what would have been a devastating blow, the bipedal being ducked beneath the bear's guard and drove its shoulder into the predator's chest with tremendous force. The air left the grizzly's lungs in an audible whoosh, and for a crucial moment, it was off balance. The creature seized the opportunity, powerful arms wrapping around the bear's midsection as it lifted and twisted in one fluid motion. The grizzly, all 800 pounds of apex predator, was actually thrown. It traveled through the air for several feet before crashing into the fallen log it had been investigating earlier. The rotten wood splintered under the impact, partially collapsing beneath the bear's weight. For a moment, the forest fell silent again. The grizzly lay amid the shattered remains of the log, stunned by the impact and struggling to regain its feet. The creature stood watching, its massive chest heaving with exertion, but making no move to close in for a killing blow. The bear managed to right itself after several attempts, shaking debris from its fur. It fixed the bipedal being with one final look, almost, Sarah thought wildly, one of respect, before turning and lumbering away into the forest, each step heavy but determined. The creature watched the retreat, still and silent until the bear had disappeared from view. Then, and only then, did it seem to relax its posture slightly. "It won," Emily whispered in disbelief. "It actually defeated a full-grown grizzly." As if hearing her words, the creature's head suddenly swiveled towards the ridge where they stood. Despite the considerable distance, Sarah felt with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at them, had perhaps been aware of their presence the entire time. Those amber eyes, visible even at this distance, fixed on Sarah with an intelligence that sent ice through her veins. Not the cold calculation of a predator assessing prey, but something deeper, more discerning, more conscious. For an eternal moment, human and unknown being regarded each other across the divide of scientific understanding. Then, with deliberate slowness, the creature raised one massive hand to its face, using a finger to wipe at the blood on its brow from the confrontation. The gesture was so unexpectedly human that Sarah nearly lowered her camera in shock. But her photographer's instincts kept her finger on the shutter button, capturing the moment in high-resolution detail. Without warning, the creature turned away from their gaze and moved toward the forest edge with that same fluid grace that defied its size. Just before it disappeared into the tree line, it paused and turned back toward them once more. It opened its mouth and emitted a sound different from its battle cries, 3 distinct vocalizations that almost seemed to carry meaning. Then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the ancient forest, with barely a disturbance in the underbrush, leaving Sarah and Emily alone with the cooling afternoon and the impossible documentation contained in their cameras. For nearly a minute, neither spoke, the forest gradually returning to life around them as birds cautiously resumed their calls and the wind stirred the pine branches overhead. "Mom," Emily finally said, her voice steady despite the extraordinary events they had witnessed. "Tell me you got that." Sarah nodded slowly, checking the preview screen on her camera to confirm what her racing heart already knew. The images were there, dozens of them in perfect clarity, documenting something that would shake the foundations of zoological science. "I got it," she confirmed, her mind already racing ahead to the implications. "And you?" Emily checked her video camera, rewinding briefly to verify the footage. "Every second. High definition." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to center herself. "We need to get to the cabin before dark. We'll review everything there and decide what to do next." As they carefully made their way down the ridge toward the lake and their rented cabin, Sarah found herself constantly scanning the forest around them. Not out of fear, precisely, but a newfound awareness that the wilderness held secrets far beyond current scientific understanding. The encounter they had witnessed and documented went beyond a simple territorial dispute between predators. The creature's behavior, its apparent awareness of their observation, the almost ritual quality of its confrontation with the grizzly, none of it fit within the established framework of wildlife biology. "Do you think it's following us?" Emily asked quietly as they descended through a particularly dense section of forest. Sarah hesitated before answering truthfully. "I don't know, but I think it knew exactly what it was doing back there. The way it looked at us afterward, it wanted us to see." "See what? The fight?" "Maybe," Sarah replied, stepping carefully over a fallen branch. "Or maybe just that it exists at all." As the forest darkened around them with the approach of evening, they finally caught sight of the small wooden cabin nestled against the northern shore of Whitefish Lake. The sight of the sturdy structure brought a measure of relief, though Sarah knew that 4 walls and a locked door represented an illusion of security at best. What they had encountered was no mindless beast, but a being of considerable intelligence and purpose. And somehow Sarah felt certain their paths would cross again before their expedition was complete. She clutched her camera a little tighter as they approached the cabin, the weight of what they had documented a tangible presence between them. Whatever happened next, the world was about to change, and they had the proof. The lock on the cabin door clicked shut with a finality that made Sarah exhale the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The one-room structure was rustic, but comfortable, a sturdy bed against the far wall, a wooden table with 4 chairs, a small kitchenette with propane stove, and a river stone fireplace that dominated the western wall. Through windows on either side of the door, The darkening waters of Whitefish Lake reflected the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Emily immediately set her backpack on the table and began extracting her video camera equipment. "We need to check the footage right away," she said, her voice tight with a combination of excitement and lingering disbelief. Sarah nodded, moving mechanically to light the oil lamps that would provide illumination for the evening. The cabin had no electricity, part of its charm under normal circumstances, but now a complication in their urgent need to review digital media. "My camera has enough battery to view the video on the LCD screen," Emily continued, already connecting the necessary cables. "But we should conserve power until we can get back to civilization and transfer everything to secure storage." Sarah noted the methodical way her daughter handled the equipment. No wasted motions, no fumbling despite the adrenaline still evident in her slightly shaking hands. In that moment, Emily seemed older than her 16 years, focused and professional in a way that stirred both pride and a hint of melancholy in Sarah. The child was becoming a woman, and circumstances had just accelerated that process considerably. "Let me secure the food first," Sarah said, retrieving their supplies from their packs. "The last thing we need is to attract that grizzly to our doorstep after what it's been through today." They worked in parallel, Emily setting up her viewing station at the table while Sarah stored their provisions in the cabin's bear-proof metal locker mounted outside the back window. By the time Sarah returned, Emily had the video queued up and ready for viewing. "I started recording when we first spotted the bear," Emily explained as Sarah pulled up a chair beside her. "So we have about 3 minutes of just the grizzly before the other thing arrived." The small LCD screen flickered to life, displaying the massive silver-tipped grizzly tearing apart the fallen log. Even compressed onto the small display, the power and majesty of the animal were evident. Emily fast-forwarded slightly until the bear's behavior changed, head lifting, nostrils flaring as it sensed the approaching presence. "There," Sarah murmured as the strange vocalization became audible on the recording. "That sound, I've never heard anything like it in 20 years of wildlife observation." They watched in silence as the confrontation unfolded again before their eyes. The quality of Emily's footage was remarkably good despite the distance and her understandable tension. The stabilization feature on her camera had prevented excessive shakiness, resulting in documentary-quality video of an impossible encounter. When they reached the moment where the creature threw the grizzly into the fallen log, Emily paused the playback. "That's not physically possible," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A male grizzly in his prime weighs between 600 and 800 pounds. Nothing should be able to throw it like that." Emily rewound and played the sequence again at half speed. The creature's technique became more apparent, a leverage move that utilized the bear's own momentum combined with extraordinary strength. "It's not just strong," Emily noted, her filmmaker's eye catching details. "Look at how it positions itself. That's not instinctual fighting. That's technique. Strategy." Sarah couldn't argue with the assessment. The being's movements displayed an intelligence and fighting knowledge that went beyond animal instinct. She reached for her own camera, turning it on to review her still photographs. "Let me see if I got any clear shots of its face," she said, cycling through the images. Most of the action shots had captured the creature in profile or from behind, but there were a few frames where it faced their direction. "There!" She stopped on one image, zooming in as much as the camera's preview function would allow. The face that stared back from the digital display defied easy categorization. The pronounced brow ridge and wide nasal area suggested primate ancestry, but the proportions were all wrong for any known great ape. The eyes, caught in a moment of direct sunlight, reflected an amber gold color that Sarah had never seen in any documented species. "It looks almost human," Emily whispered, leaning closer to the small screen. "But not quite." "Not human," Sarah corrected firmly, her scientific mind attempting to maintain some objectivity. Humanoid, perhaps. Definitely primate adjacent in evolutionary terms, but she trailed off, unable to complete the thought with any established scientific framework. They continued reviewing both sets of media in silence, occasionally rewinding to examine specific moments in greater detail. When they finally reached the end, the creature's departure into the forest after its final, almost ceremonial glance toward their position, Emily shut off the playback and looked at her mother. "What do we do with this?" she asked simply. It was the question Sarah had been dreading since the moment they'd witnessed the encounter. As a scientist and naturalist, she understood the tremendous significance of what they had documented. This wasn't some blurry, ambiguous Bigfoot footage that could be easily dismissed. The clarity and duration of their evidence would withstand scrutiny. It documented not just the creature's existence, but its behavior, its intelligence, its physical capabilities. The scientific implications are enormous, Sarah said carefully, organizing her thoughts. If verified, this would represent the zoological discovery of the century, an unknown hominid species existing contemporaneously with modern humans, right here in North America. So we should release it, right? Emily pressed. Contact National Geographic or a university. This could make your career, Mom. Sarah wasn't so certain. 20 years of working in wildlife conservation had taught her much about the complex relationship between discovery and protection. New species, once documented, often faced immediate threats. Habitat disruption from scientific expeditions, poaching, trophy hunting, or simple human encroachment driven by curiosity. "It's not that simple," she replied, running a hand through her wind-tangled hair. "Think about what would happen. This location would be swarmed with researchers, media, thrill seekers. Even with park protections in place, the creature's habitat would be compromised overnight." "But people need to know," Emily countered. "This changes everything we understand about evolution, about North American ecology. It can't just remain hidden." "I'm not suggesting permanent suppression," Sarah clarified. "But we need to be strategic about how this information enters the public domain. Who we contact first, what protections we try to secure before the media circus begins." Emily seemed about to argue further when a sound from outside the cabin halted their conversation. Something heavy had disturbed the underbrush near the lakeshore. Not the casual rustling of a small animal, but the deliberate movement of something substantial. Both women froze, eyes darting to the windows where the gathering darkness had transformed the glass into mirrors reflecting the lamplight inside. Sarah slowly rose and dimmed the nearest lamp, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness. "Bear?" Emily whispered, her hand instinctively moving toward her pack where the bear spray was stored. Sarah shook her head slightly, listening intently. Bears aren't usually active after dark, unless they're habituated to humans or desperate for food. And they're not subtle. The sound came again, closer now. A branch snapping under significant weight, followed by what might have been footsteps receding toward the denser forest beyond the cabin's small clearing. Sarah moved carefully to the window, peering out into the darkness. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the rippling surface of the lake, but the forest edge remained a wall of impenetrable shadow. She strained her eyes, searching for movement or the reflection of light from animal eyes. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, just at the boundary where forest met clearing, something moved. A darker shadow among shadows, too tall and upright to be a bear. It stood motionless for several heartbeats before melting back into the tree line with that same fluid grace they had witnessed earlier. "It followed us," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her system. "It knows exactly where we are." Emily joined her at the window, though whatever presence had been there was now gone. "Why? What does it want?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I don't think it means us harm. If it did, we wouldn't have made it back to the cabin." The realization hung between them, its implications unsettling. The creature hadn't stumbled upon their location by accident. It had tracked them, observed. Them, perhaps even now, was watching the cabin from the concealment of the forest. "We should try to communicate with it," Emily suggested, the filmmaker in her immediately seizing on the unprecedented opportunity. Sarah shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. Not at night, not when we have no idea of its intentions or capabilities." She moved to check that the door was securely locked. "For now, we stay inside and remain vigilant." They spent the next hour in tense watchfulness, taking turns at the windows while continuing to review their footage and photographs more carefully. Sarah found herself repeatedly drawn to one particular image, a close-up shot of the creature's eyes during its final gaze toward their position on the ridge. There was something in that look beyond animal intelligence, something that raised questions too profound to articulate. "I've been thinking," Emily said as she rejoined her mother at the table after her watch rotation. "What if others already know about these creatures?" Sarah glanced up from her camera. "What do you mean?" "Indigenous legends," Emily elaborated. "Every Native American tribe in the Pacific Northwest has stories about wild men of the forests. Sasquatch, Skookum, a dozen. Other names? What if they've always known? What if only Western science has been in the dark?" It was a perspective that Sarah, with her empirical training, had to acknowledge held merit. Indigenous ecological knowledge often predated Western scientific understanding by centuries or millennia. She thought of her colleague, Michael Blackfeather, a Blackfeet ethnobiologist who had often spoken of his tribe's traditional knowledge, with a certainty that transcended academic caution. "It's possible," Sarah conceded. "But that still doesn't answer the question of what we do with our evidence." Emily was silent for a moment, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "What would Michael advise?" she finally asked, referencing the colleague she had met several times during university visits with her mother. Sarah considered this. Michael had always maintained that knowledge carried responsibility, that discoveries concerning the natural world weren't meant for personal glory, but for balanced advancement of understanding and protection. "He'd tell us to consult the tribal elders before any academic institutions," Sarah said slowly, "to understand the cultural context before imposing a Western scientific framework." "Then that's what we should do," Emily said with newfound certainty. "Contact Michael first. Ask him to arrange a meeting with Blackfeet elders who might have knowledge about these beings." The suggestion made practical sense. The Blackfeet Nation's territorial knowledge of Glacier National Park predated the park's establishment by thousands of years. If anyone would have historical context for the creature's existence and behavior, it would be them. Sarah was about to agree when a distinctive electronic chirp broke the cabin's silence, her satellite phone receiving a text message. In these remote parts of the park, regular cell service was non-existent, but her work often took her to isolated locations, necessitating the expensive device for emergency communications. Frowning, she retrieved the phone from her pack. The message was from Park Service headquarters, addressed to all backcountry permit holders in the northern sector. Alert. Aggressive bear activity reported near Whitefish Lake. All hikers advised to exercise extreme caution or evacuate if possible. Rangers en route to assess situation. "They're already responding," Sarah said, showing Emily the message. "Someone else must have reported the grizzly's behavior." Emily looked skeptical. "Or reported seeing the creature. Either way, rangers coming." "Here complicates things," Sarah nodded, calculating rapidly. "They'll likely reach this area by midday tomorrow. We need to decide before then. Share what we've seen or keep it to ourselves until we've consulted Michael and the tribal elders. If we tell the rangers about the creature, everything happens fast and publicly," Emily reasoned. "If we don't, we're withholding potentially important safety information from park authorities." The ethical dimensions of their situation were becoming increasingly complex. As they debated their options, another sound from outside caught their attention. Not from the forest edge this time, but from the direction of the lake. Sarah moved to the window facing the water. The moon had risen higher now, illuminating the lake's surface with silver light. Near the shoreline, approximately 50 yards from the cabin, a disturbance broke the water's mirror-like surface. At first, Sarah thought it might be a swimming deer or elk, not uncommon in these parts. Then the shape emerged more fully. Water, cascading from broad shoulders as a massive fur-covered figure rose from the lake and stepped onto the shore. "Emily," Sarah called softly, not taking her eyes from the window. "Bring your camera, quickly." Emily joined her, camera already in hand, and gasped softly at the sight. The creature, unmistakably the same being they had observed fighting the GRIZZLY, stood fully exposed in the moonlight. Water glistened on its dark fur as it shook itself, an oddly dog-like gesture that contrasted with its massive humanoid frame. For several long moments, it remained at the shoreline, seemingly unaware or unconcerned about its visibility. Then, with deliberate slowness, it turned toward the cabin. Even at this distance, Sarah felt the weight of its gaze fixing directly on their window. "It knows we're watching," she whispered. "I'm recording," Emily confirmed, her voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. The creature took 3 measured steps toward the cabin, then stopped. In the silvery illumination, Sarah could make out more details of its appearance. The massive barrel chest, the proportionately shorter legs compared to human anatomy, the distinctive conical shape of its head. The wound on its arm from the bear's bite was visible as a darker patch against its fur. What happened next would forever alter Sarah's understanding of the natural world and humanity's place within it. The creature slowly, deliberately, raised one hand to its face, not in the self-grooming gesture they had witnessed earlier, but in what appeared to be an unmistakable communication. It placed its palm flat over its eyes, then removed it, repeating the gesture twice more. "Is it signing to us?" Emily whispered, her camera unwavering. Before Sarah could respond, the creature made another gesture. One arm extended toward them, palm forward, then slowly lowered to point at the ground where it stood. The meaning seemed unmistakable. "Stay. There. I am here." "This isn't possible," Sarah murmured, even as she watched it happen. "Intentional symbolic communication from an undocumented species? This goes beyond anything in the scientific literature." The creature repeated the sequence of gestures once more, as if to ensure its message was received. Then, with a final direct look toward their window, it turned and moved back into the forest with that same silent grace that defied its size. For several minutes after it disappeared, neither Sarah nor Emily spoke. The implications of what they had witnessed too monumental to immediately process. "It wasn't just communicating," Emily finally said, rewinding her footage to review the sequence. "It was establishing contact, deliberately, specifically with us." Sarah couldn't deny the assessment. The creature's behavior went beyond animal intelligence into the realm of consciousness and intentionality, typically associated only with humans. It hadn't just been aware of being observed, it had chosen to initiate communication with its observers. "This changes everything," Sarah said quietly. "Not just what we do with the footage, but how we frame it. This isn't just an undiscovered species. It's potentially a non-human intelligence with which we share our world." The weight of the revelation settled over them like a physical presence. Their decision about how to proceed had just become infinitely more complex and consequential. "We need to sleep," Sarah finally said, noting Emily's exhausted expression despite her excitement. "We'll take watches, 3 hours each. Tomorrow we'll contact Michael and begin figuring out our next steps." As Emily prepared for first watch, Sarah tried to organize her thoughts into some semblance of a plan. The satellite phone text indicated rangers would arrive tomorrow, limiting their window for independent action. The creature clearly knew their location and had chosen to initiate some form of contact. And somewhere in the surrounding forest, A wounded and potentially dangerous grizzly was still recovering from its confrontation. Their simple mother-daughter wilderness photography trip had become something else entirely. They were now unwitting ambassadors at the frontier of a discovery that could rewrite humanity's understanding of its place in the natural world. Sarah checked her camera's battery level and memory capacity one last time before setting it within easy reach of her sleeping bag. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would document it with the same care and precision they had applied today. The world might not be ready for what they had discovered, but history had placed the responsibility in their hands nonetheless. As she drifted toward uneasy sleep, Sarah's mind returned to that final image, the creature standing in the moonlight, deliberately signing toward their cabin. Not a mindless beast, not a simple biological specimen, but a being with agency and intention. A neighbor humanity didn't know it had. In the morning, they would begin the delicate process of introducing these neighbors to a world that had denied their existence for centuries. The responsibility was enormous, but also, Sarah realized as consciousness faded, an incredible privilege. Sarah woke to the gentle pressure of Emily's hand on her shoulder, transitioning instantly from sleep to alertness, a skill honed through years of wilderness expeditions. "Your watch," Emily whispered, her face pale in the pre-dawn light filtering through the cabin windows. "Everything's been quiet since about 2 a.m., Sarah nodded, checking her watch. 4:30 a.m. The gray light suggested sunrise was still an hour away. "Get some sleep," she told her daughter, noting the shadows under Emily's eyes. "I'll wake you if anything changes." As Emily settled into her sleeping bag, Sarah moved to the window overlooking the lake. The water's surface lay perfectly still, reflecting the fading stars like a mirror. The forest edge remained dark and impenetrable, revealing no signs of their nighttime visitor. Sarah retrieved her satellite phone, powering it on to check for updates. A new message from Park Service headquarters had arrived during her sleep. Update: Ranger team departing headquarters at 0600. Expected arrival: Whitefish, lake area by 1200. All permit holders advised to remain at campsites near shelters until contacted. The timeline matched her earlier estimate. They had until midday to formulate their approach. Sarah debated sending a message to Michael Blackfeather immediately, but decided against it. At this hour, she would only wake him, and she needed to organize her thoughts before initiating that conversation. Instead, she used the satellite phone's limited internet capability to search for any recent reports of unusual sightings in Glacier National Park. The results were mostly tourist photos of wildlife and scenery, with occasional mentions of bear encounters, but nothing that suggested public awareness of what she and Emily had documented. As the first true light of dawn illuminated the landscape, Sarah scanned the lakeshore and forest edge with renewed clarity. The ground between the cabin and the trees showed no obvious tracks, but near the water's edge where the creature had emerged the previous night, she could make out depressions in the soft soil, evidence that their experience hadn't been a shared hallucination. Emily stirred at 7:30, roused by the morning sunlight streaming through the eastern window. She immediately checked her camera, as if reassuring herself that the footage remained intact. "Still there," Sarah confirmed, noting her daughter's action. "And I think I can see tracks by the lake shore." They prepared a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, both women moving with the efficiency of experienced campers despite their interrupted night's sleep. Their conversation remained focused on immediate concerns: conserving camera battery power, what to tell the rangers, how to contact Michael, avoiding the larger philosophical questions that their discovery had raised. "We should document those tracks before they degrade further," Sarah said as they finished their meal. "But we need to be extremely careful. If the creature is still nearby, I don't want to give it any reason to feel threatened." Emily nodded, already packing her camera equipment. "Do you think it's watching us right now?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Possibly, Its behavior suggests highly developed territorial awareness. We're essentially visitors in its home range. They exited the cabin cautiously, scanning the tree line before moving toward the lakeshore. The morning air carried the scent of pine and clean water, the surrounding forest alive with bird calls, a stark contrast to the unnatural silence that had preceded the creature's appearance yesterday. The tracks by the water's edge exceeded Sarah's expectations. The soft mud had preserved detailed impressions of the creature's feet, massive prints nearly 16 inches long and 8 inches wide at the forefoot. The distinctive arched structure showed 5 toes with evidence of dense padding and surprising flexibility compared to other primate footprints. "These are perfect," Sarah murmured, crouching beside one particularly clear impression. The dermal ridges are clearly visible. This would be sufficient for taxonomic identification in any conventional species. Emily captured video documentation, while Sarah took multiple photographs with scale markers placed carefully beside the prints. The scientific part of Sarah's mind activated automatically, noting the depth of the impressions, the stride length between sequential prints, and the biomechanical implications of the foot structure. The weight distribution suggests bipedal. Adaptation over evolutionary time, she explained as they worked. This isn't a bear occasionally standing upright. This foot evolved specifically for walking on 2 legs. They followed the trail of prints to where they disappeared into the denser ground cover at the forest edge. Sarah was tempted to continue, tracking into the trees, but reminded herself of the approaching ranger team and their limited time. "We've got enough for preliminary documentation," she decided. "Let's get back to the cabin and contact Michael." As they turned back, Sarah froze, suddenly, raising her hand in the universal signal for silence. Emily stopped immediately, her eyes questioning. "Listen," Sarah whispered. At first, there was nothing beyond the normal forest sounds. Then they heard it, a low moaning growl that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. It came from somewhere in the forest to their north, perhaps a quarter-mile distant. "The grizzly," Emily breathed, recognizing the sound. Sarah nodded grimly. "And it doesn't sound good. That vocalization indicates pain or distress." The implications were immediately clear, to both of them. The bear had survived its confrontation with the bipedal creature, but was likely seriously injured. A wounded grizzly was among the most dangerous animals in North America, unpredictable, aggressive, and unable to flee or hunt normally. The rangers are walking into a potentially deadly situation if they approach from that direction, Sarah said, her mind racing. "We need to warn them." Back inside the cabin, Sarah composed a message to park headquarters on her satellite phone. "Urgent. Injured grizzly north of Whitefish Lake cabin. Aggressive encounter observed yesterday. Bear sustained significant injuries. Rangers should approach with extreme caution. Sarah Blackwood, permit, GNP 2025-0423. She hesitated before sending, weighing whether to include information about the creature. After a moment's consideration, she decided against it. A wounded grizzly represented a concrete, immediate danger that would be taken seriously. Introducing an unverified species into the warning might undermine its urgency. After sending the alert, Sarah immediately called Michael Blackfeather. The phone rang several times before his familiar voice answered. "Sarah? This is unexpected. Aren't you supposed to be off the grid with Emily this week?" "Michael, I need your help," Sarah said without preamble. "We've documented something extraordinary. Something that requires immediate consultation with tribal elders before official channels become involved." The change in Michael's tone was immediate. "What kind of documentation?" "High-resolution video and photographs of a bipedal, non-human primate species approximately 8 feet tall, engaged in territorial combat with a grizzly bear." The silence on the other end lasted so long that Sarah checked to ensure the connection hadn't dropped. "You're certain?" Michael finally asked, his voice careful. "Beyond any doubt," Sarah confirmed. "The footage is clear, extensive, and shows intelligent behavior, including what appears to be intentional communication through gesture. Another. Long pause. Where are you exactly? Northern shore of Whitefish Lake. But Michael, there's a complication. Park rangers are en route, expected to arrive by noon. They're responding to reports of the bear, but when they get here, they'll want your footage, Michael finished. Her thought. Have you told them about the being you encountered? Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. The sound of movement came through the connection as Michael apparently began preparing to travel. The situation is delicate. The Blackfeet have traditions regarding these beings that extend back thousands of years. There are protocols for encounters, proper ways to acknowledge their territory. So the tribe knows about them? Emily asked, leaning closer to the phone that Sarah had set to speaker mode. Not knows about them in the way Western science knows about documented species. Michael clarified. The relationship is more complex. They are understood as intelligent neighbors with whom we share the land, not as animals to be studied or classified. Sarah felt a chill of realization. That's why there's never been official acknowledgement or protection. It's not just about lack of evidence. It's about respecting their autonomy. Precisely, Michael confirmed. In many indigenous worldviews, to classify these beings as animals, or even as a species, misunderstands their nature and diminishes their standing. They are people, not human people, but people nonetheless. The perspective shifted something fundamental in Sarah's understanding. She had been approaching their discovery through the lens of scientific documentation, a new species to be catalogued, studied, and protected. But what if that framework itself was inappropriate? What should we do when the rangers arrive? She asked. Michael's response was measured. I'm leaving now for Glacier. I can be at the East Glacier entrance in 3 hours, but it's another 2 hours to Whitefish Lake, even pushing it. That puts me there around noon, potentially after the rangers arrive. We need to stall them, Emily said decisively. Not exactly, Michael countered. But you need to be selective about what you share. The injured grizzly is a legitimate safety concern that requires their attention. Focus on that. If they ask, if you saw anything else unusual, don't lie, but perhaps suggest that your other observations require additional review before drawing conclusions. The strategy made sense. It wasn't dishonest, merely cautious. And the footage? Sarah asked. Back it up if possible. Multiple copies, multiple devices. But don't volunteer it unless directly asked, and even then, express a preference to review it more thoroughly before sharing widely. After finalizing arrangements to meet, Sarah ended the call and turned to Emily. We need to prepare for the rangers' arrival. Let's back up the footage and organize our approach. They spent the next hour creating duplicate copies of their documentation, using Sarah's camera's memory card as a secondary storage location for Emily's video files and vice versa. They then reviewed their photographs of the footprints, selecting the clearest images that showed the anatomical details. At 10:45 a.m., the satellite phone chirped with another incoming message. Ranger team approximately 1 hour from your location. Please remain at cabin. GNP Ranger Division. They're ahead of schedule, Sarah noted with a frown. Michael won't be here before they arrive. Emily was about to respond when a sound from outside seized their attention, the distinctive huffing of a bear, much closer than the distressed growls they had heard earlier. Both women moved cautiously to the window. The grizzly stood at the edge of the clearing, perhaps 50 yards from the cabin. Even from that distance, Sarah could see that it was the same massive silver-tipped male they had witnessed in combat, with the bipedal creature. Its condition had deteriorated significantly overnight. One ear was partially torn away, its left shoulder matted with dried blood, and its movement as it swayed at the forest boundary showed obvious pain and instability. It's dying, Sarah whispered, her experienced eye recognizing the signs. Internal bleeding, possibly, or infection already setting in from its wounds. The bear's appearance here wasn't aggression, but desperation. It had reached the final stages of life where normal caution gave way to last resort behavior. "Should we use the bear spray if it approaches?" Emily asked, reaching for the canister. Sarah shook her head slightly. "Let's wait. It's not displaying direct aggression, and it might." "Move on." The grizzly took 2 more shambling steps into the clearing, then stopped again, head lifting as it tested the air. Sarah recognized the behavior. It had caught their scent from the cabin. Under normal circumstances, this would likely trigger either retreat or a potential charge. But the bear's reaction defied standard patterns. It turned its massive head toward the northern section of forest from which it had emerged and issued a low, moaning bellow. Not a threat display, but something closer to alarm. Then, with surprising speed for its injured state, it lurched back, into the protective cover of the trees. "Something spooked it," Emily said, confusion evident in her voice. Even injured, a grizzly that size shouldn't fear much. Before Sarah could hypothesize, the answer emerged from the forest at almost the exact spot where the bear had disappeared. The bipedal creature stepped into view, its massive form moving with that same fluid grace they had observed previously. In daylight, its fur appeared more reddish-brown than black, with silver-tipped guard hairs across its shoulders reminiscent of the bear's own coloration. It paused, surveying the clearing with deliberate attention before its gaze fixed on the cabin. Even across the distance, Sarah felt the weight of that intelligent focus, a sensation entirely different from being observed by conventional wildlife. It drove the bear away from us, Emily realized, her camera already recording through the window. It's protecting its territory, including us within that boundary. The observation aligned with the creature's behavior the previous night, the apparent communication, the establishment of boundaries. It wasn't merely tolerating their presence, it was actively including them within the sphere of its protection. The creature remained at the forest edge for nearly a minute, its attention shifting between the cabin and the surrounding area. Then, with unexpected deliberation, it moved to the exact location where they had been examining tracks earlier that morning. It crouched, massive hand touching the ground where Sarah had placed her scale markers, before looking directly toward the cabin again. "It's aware of our scientific documentation," Sarah said, astonishment coloring her voice. "It's acknowledging that we're studying it." Before they could process this extraordinary development, the creature's posture changed abruptly. Its head turned sharply to the east, body tensing in apparent alert. A moment later, it retreated into the forest with that same remarkable silence, disappearing from view as completely as if it had never been there. Sarah strained to hear what had triggered the creature's departure. After several seconds, she caught it. The distant sound of human voices and the crunch of boots on the trail approaching from the east. The ranger team had arrived. "They must have pushed hard to get here this quickly," Sarah said, checking her. "Watch. Not quite 11 a.m., over an hour ahead of their estimated arrival." "What do we do about what just happened?" Emily asked urgently. "The creature was just here. The bear is still in the area." "We stick to Michael's advice," Sarah decided after a moment's consideration. "The injured bear is a legitimate safety concern. We inform them about that immediately. For the rest, we proceed cautiously." They barely had time to gather themselves before 3 figures emerged from the forest trail into the clearing. 2 men and a woman, all wearing the distinctive green and gray uniforms of National Park Service rangers. Each carried a pack with standard backcountry equipment, and the woman had a tranquilizer rifle slung across her shoulder. Sarah opened the cabin door and raised her hand in greeting as the team approached. "Ms. Blackwood?" the leading ranger called. He was tall, perhaps in his early 50s, with weathered features that spoke of decades in the backcountry. "I'm Chief Ranger James Kelly. This is Ranger Wilson and Ranger Martinez. We received your alert about an injured grizzly in the area." "Thank you for coming so quickly," Sarah replied, stepping outside with Emily close behind. "Yes, we observed." The bear just minutes ago at the northern edge of the clearing. It's in very poor condition, wounded, possibly dying. Ranger Martinez, the woman with the tranquilizer rifle, immediately began scanning the tree line. Can you describe the injuries? Your message mentioned an aggressive encounter. Sarah hesitated, weighing her words carefully. The bear appears to have been in a territorial conflict with another predator. It has significant lacerations to the head and shoulder, possible internal injuries based on its movement patterns. Another predator? Ranger Wilson, the youngest of the three, looked skeptical. What kind? Nothing in these parts should be able to injure a mature grizzly like that. The direct question forced Sarah to navigate carefully. We're still reviewing our observations and documentation. The encounter occurred at dusk under challenging visibility conditions. Chief Ranger Kelly's eyes narrowed slightly at the evasive answer. Ms. Blackwood, you're a respected wildlife photographer with extensive backcountry experience. Your observation skills are well documented. What exactly did you see? Sarah met his gaze steadily. We captured photo and video documentation of the encounter that I'd prefer to review more thoroughly before making official statements. What I can tell you with certainty is that there's a severely injured 800-pound grizzly in the immediate vicinity that poses a significant safety risk. The rangers exchanged looks, clearly noting the deflection but also recognizing the immediate priority. We'll need to locate and assess the bear first, Kelly decided. If it's as badly injured as you describe, we may need to euthanize it humanely, rather than risk it suffering or becoming a danger to visitors. Sarah nodded her agreement. It was moving north when we last saw it, perhaps 10 minutes ago. Martinez, take point with the tranq rifle, Kelly instructed. Wilson, maintain radio contact with headquarters. I'd like Ms. Blackwood to accompany us to help locate the bear, given her observation of its condition. Sarah glanced at Emily, reluctant to separate. My daughter should remain here for safety, Kelly finished firmly. Wilson will stay at the cabin while we track the bear. The arrangement made tactical sense, though Sarah disliked leaving Emily alone. Still, Ranger Wilson seemed capable, and the cabin provided reasonable security. I'll be fine, Mom, Emily assured her, though her eyes conveyed an unspoken message. Be careful what you reveal. Sarah quickly gathered her camera and bear spray before joining Rangers Kelly and Martinez at the clearing's edge. As they prepared to enter the forest, Martinez performed a final equipment check on the tranquilizer rifle. Standard protocol is to attempt chemical immobilization for assessment, she explained to Sarah. Euthanasia is only if absolutely necessary. Sarah appreciated the transparency. The bear's in really bad shape. I'm not sure tranquilization is humane at this point. Martinez nodded grimly. We'll make that determination on site. As they moved into the forest following the bear's clear trail of broken vegetation and occasional blood smears on foliage, Kelly positioned himself beside Sarah. While we track, he said in a low voice that wouldn't carry to Martinez's walking point, perhaps you could tell me more about what you're not telling me. The directness of the question didn't surprise Sarah. Park rangers, especially veterans like Kelly, developed finely tuned instincts for when visitors were withholding information. I'm a scientist first, Chief Ranger, Sarah replied carefully. I don't make claims without thoroughly reviewing evidence, especially when that evidence might have significant implications. Significant enough that you contacted Michael Blackfeather before notifying us about what really happened here? Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. How did you— Small community, Kelly said simply. Michael called the station this morning, asking about permit holders in the Whitefish Lake area. Specifically, about you. Wasn't hard to connect the dots, especially after your carefully worded message about the bear. Sarah considered her options. Kelly clearly suspected they had observed something beyond an ordinary wildlife encounter, but he hadn't pressed for specifics yet, suggesting he might be more open-minded than she'd anticipated. Chief Ranger, I'm not being evasive without reason. What we documented yesterday requires careful consideration regarding how it's introduced into the public and scientific domains. There are ethical dimensions beyond standard wildlife management protocols. Kelly studied her face for a moment before responding. This wouldn't happen to relate to the clusters of unusual activity we've been tracking in this sector over the past 5 years, would it? Activity that never quite makes it into official reports? The implication in his question was clear. Kelly knew more than his official position might suggest. Before Sarah could formulate a response, Martinez raised her hand from her position, ahead, signaling them to stop. "Blood trail's getting heavier," she whispered as they caught up. "And there's something else." She pointed to a depression in the soft forest floor, a footprint, but unlike any that would be produced by conventional wildlife. Even partially obscured by leaf litter, the dimensions and distinctive shape were unmistakable. "What made that?" Kelly asked, his voice betraying no particular surprise. Sarah met his eyes, recognizing that they had reached a decisive moment. "That's what I've been carefully not discussing, Chief Ranger, and I think you already have some idea of what it might be." Martinez looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "Sir? What am I missing here?" Kelly straightened, making a decision. "Martinez, continue tracking the bear. Keep your radio active. I need a moment with Ms. Blackwood." As Martinez moved ahead, Kelly turned to Sarah with an unexpected intensity. "In 23 years as a ranger in this park, I've encountered 5 situations involving tracks like these. 3 times, I've heard vocalizations that match no known species. Once, I glimpsed something moving through the trees that defied explanation. Each time, I've filed reports that subsequently disappeared from the system." Sarah felt a surge of cautious hope. "You've been documenting these encounters?" "Trying to," Kelly confirmed, "but there appears to be an unofficial policy regarding certain types of observations. Reports get reclassified, evidence gets misplaced, witnesses get reassigned or discredited." "Containment," Sarah murmured, the implications dawning on her. "Exactly," Kelly nodded, "which is why I'm extremely interested in whatever documentation you and your daughter have collected." Before Sarah could respond, Martinez's urgent voice crackled over the radio. "Sir, I've located the bear. North Ridge, approximately 300 yards. From my position. But there's a complication. You're going to want to see this." The tension in the ranger's voice propelled them forward at a quick pace, navigating through increasingly dense underbrush until they reached Martinez's position crouched behind a fallen tree. "There," she whispered, pointing toward a small clearing. Ahead, the grizzly lay on its side at the center of the clearing, its massive body completely still. Even from this distance, Sarah could see it was dead, the unnatural posture and utter immobility unmistakable to her experienced eye. But it wasn't the bear that had prompted Martinez's urgent call. Standing over the grizzly's body was the bipedal creature, its back to their position as it systematically arranged branches and vegetation over the dead predator in what could only be described as a deliberate burial process. Sarah instinctively reached for her camera, but Kelly's hand gently restrained her. "Wait," he whispered. "Let it finish." For the next 5 minutes, they watched in silent astonishment as the creature completed its task, covering the grizzly completely with a mound of branches, rocks, and torn vegetation. When finished, it stood, motionless beside its handiwork, head bowed in what appeared to be a moment of contemplation or respect. Then, without warning, it turned directly toward their hiding place, amber eyes fixing with uncanny precision on their position. Martinez gasped softly, her hand instinctively moving toward her rifle. "Don't," Sarah whispered urgently. "It's not threatening us." The creature held their gaze for several heartbeats, then deliberately raised one hand in a gesture that mirrored the communication it had displayed at the lakeshore, palm forward, then lowered to point at the ground. "Stay there. I am here." With that final gesture, it turned and moved deeper into the forest, disappearing among the ancient trees with that signature fluid grace that defied its size. The silence that followed seemed to vibrate with significance. Martinez looked, shell-shocked, her professional composure temporarily abandoned. Kelly's expression was more complex, wonder mixed with vindication and concern. 23 years, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. 23 years of glimpses and questions and filed reports that go nowhere. And now this. Sarah understood completely. The creature's behavior, its ritualistic treatment of the dead bear, its awareness of their observation, its deliberate communication, transcended classification as mere animal activity. They had witnessed something that challenged the foundational assumptions of biological science and human exceptionalism. The containment protocols you mentioned, Sarah said, carefully. They exist for a reason, don't they? Not just bureaucratic denial, but active suppression. Kelly nodded slowly. The question now is what we do with what we've just witnessed, and what you and your daughter have documented. Martinez found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Sir, we have reporting obligations, standard protocols for unusual wildlife encounters. There's nothing standard about this, Ranger, Kelly interrupted gently. And I think we all recognize that conventional reporting channels might not be appropriate in this case. He turned to Sarah, his decision apparently made. I think it's time we had a conversation with Michael Blackfeather. All of us. Including your daughter and whatever documentation you've collected. The implication was clear. Kelly was choosing to step outside official protocols, aligning himself with Sarah's cautious approach rather than institutional procedures. He should be arriving at the East Glacier entrance soon, Sarah confirmed. But there's something else you should know. She described the creature's apparent protective behavior toward the cabin, its investigation of their scientific documentation, and its seeming awareness of being studied. This isn't just a rare animal sighting, she concluded. We're dealing with a non-human intelligence that appears to be making deliberate decisions about how it interacts with humans. That changes everything about how we proceed. As they made their way back toward the cabin, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on her shoulders. What had begun as a simple wildlife photography expedition had evolved into something far more consequential. They now stood at the intersection of scientific discovery, indigenous knowledge, institutional containment protocols, and the autonomous existence of a being that defied conventional classification. And somewhere in the ancient forest surrounding them, that being was watching, aware, and making its own decisions about the unfolding situation. The cabin felt crowded with 6 people gathered around the small wooden table. Sarah and Emily sat beside each other, their cameras connected to Emily's laptop. Across from them, Michael, Blackfeather and an elder from the Blackfeet Nation named Joseph Running Elk, studied the images with intense concentration. Rangers Kelly and Martinez completed the circle, their expressions a mixture of awe and professional concern. I've waited my entire career to see evidence this clear, Michael said. His voice hushed as Emily's video played on the screen. The footage of the confrontation between the grizzly and the bipedal creature unfolded in high definition, leaving no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation. Joseph Running Elk, whose weathered face suggested at least 80 years of life, nodded slowly. The Sapiai Pa Vasin, he said, using a Blackfeet term. The forest people. They have shared these mountains with us since before memory. Why hasn't the tribe ever publicly acknowledged their existence? Sarah asked. Joseph's dark eyes reflected ancient wisdom. Would you announce the location of your family to those who might wish them harm? These beings are not animals to be studied or contained. They are neighbors with whom we have maintained respectful distance for generations. Ranger Martinez, still processing the morning's encounter, leaned forward. But this changes everything we understand about North American ecology, about primate evolution. The scientific implications are precisely why caution is warranted, Michael interrupted gently. Western science has a history of placing classification and study above the autonomy of the subjects being examined. Chief Ranger Kelly, who had been quietly contemplating the footage, finally spoke. There's another concern here. In my experience, when evidence like this surfaces, certain government agencies take an immediate interest. Evidence disappears, witnesses are discredited, and access to areas with confirmed activity becomes suddenly restricted for environmental studies that never produce public results. The implication hung heavily in the air, a systematic containment protocol that transcended normal scientific or conservation channels. So, what do we do? Emily asked, voicing the central question. Pretend we never saw it? Delete the only clear evidence that could protect these beings by proving their existence? Joseph Running Elk smiled at her youthful directness. There is a middle path. Knowledge can be preserved without being broadcast, protected until the time is right for its wider sharing. A sound from outside interrupted their discussion. A distinctive series of wood knocks that Michael and Joseph immediately recognized, their heads turning sharply toward the window. It's here, Michael said quietly. They moved cautiously to the windows. In the clearing before the cabin, approximately 50 yards from the door, stood the creature. In daylight, its massive form was even more impressive, at least 8 feet tall, with proportions that suggested both power and surprising grace. It's deliberately showing itself, Sarah realized. This isn't an accidental encounter. Joseph nodded. It's acknowledging the counsel we're holding, making itself a party to the discussion about its future. As they watched, the creature performed a series of gestures, complex movements of its massive hands that Joseph observed with particular intensity. It's using the old sign language, the elder explained. Modified for their anatomy, but recognizable. My grandfather taught me some of these signs. He pointed as the creature repeated a specific motion. That means see but do not disturb, and that one, as another gesture followed, means mutual protection. It's proposing terms, Michael translated for the others. Acknowledgement without interference. Mutual respect of boundaries. The creature concluded its communication, then slowly lowered itself to a seated position in the clearing, a deliberate posture of non-aggression that nonetheless maintained its dignity. It was waiting for their response. This is unprecedented, Ranger Kelly whispered. Direct communication and negotiation with an undocumented intelligent species. Joseph turned to the group, his expression solemn. For thousands of years, our people have maintained this balance. We acknowledge them in our stories, our ceremonies. We respect their territories. In return, they have lived alongside us, occasionally serving as guardians when needed, but mostly keeping to themselves. The burial ritual, Sarah recalled. It wasn't just disposing of the bear's body, it was demonstrating ethical behavior, showing respect for another predator even after conflict. Precisely, Joseph confirmed. These are not animals but people, not human people, but people nonetheless, with their own society, ethics, and agency. The decision they now faced transcended scientific discovery or career advancement. It concerned the fundamental right of an intelligent species to exist on its own terms, free from human interference or exploitation. Sarah looked at her daughter, seeing in Emily's eyes the same realization. The footage they had captured could prove the existence of these beings beyond any doubt, and in doing so, could forever destroy the privacy and autonomy they had maintained for millennia. What if we took a different approach? Sarah suggested. Instead of releasing the footage publicly, we use it to create a coalition of protection. Indigenous knowledge keepers, selected scientists, key conservation officers, a trust of guardians who preserve both the evidence and the beings themselves. Michael nodded slowly. A middle path, as Joseph suggested. Not denial, but selective, responsible stewardship of knowledge. Emily looked torn. But the world should know they exist. The world isn't ready, Ranger Martinez said, surprising everyone with her shift in perspective. Look how we treat the intelligent species we already acknowledge. Gorillas, elephants, whales. Knowledge hasn't guaranteed their protection. Outside, the creature remained seated, patiently waiting for the humans to reach their consensus. As sunset painted the mountains in gold and crimson, they emerged from the cabin together. All, 6 humans walking slowly into the clearing where the being waited. Joseph led them, carrying a small bundle of ceremonial herbs that he respectfully placed on the ground between them. The creature rose to its full height, acknowledging the offering with a gesture that Joseph returned. No words were exchanged, but an understanding was reached. Sarah felt it like a physical presence, a covenant between 2 intelligent species sharing the same ancient landscape. They would protect the knowledge. The coalition would form quietly, bringing together those with the wisdom to understand what was at stake. The footage would be preserved but not broadcast, serving instead as the foundation for a new approach to conservation based on mutual respect rather than study and classification. As dusk deepened into night, the creature made one final gesture, a movement that Joseph translated simply as, "Until we meet again," before melting into the forest darkness. Sarah placed her arm around Emily's shoulders as they watched it disappear. "Some discoveries," she said softly, "aren't meant to be possessions. They're privileges, glimpses of a world more complex and wondrous than we imagined." The forest had kept its secrets for thousands of years. With wisdom and restraint, perhaps it could keep them for thousands more.